First of all, we'll be going through the top 10 most probed ports for this week, for the last week, ending last night. There are not much changes from previous weeks. Usual culprits here. The top one is taken by the Telnet port 23 TCP, followed by 445, which is for SMB. In fact, actually, it jumped a place from last week. I think this could be due to the reason, guesstimating here, due to the release of SMB Bleed, another SMB-based vulnerability, looking after, I think, SMB version 3.11 vulnerability. I think maybe that because of that, the probes have increased a little bit. Coming down, AT 1433, AT 2281. But I just want to point out that ending up with the top 10, with the 8089 TCP. The only reason I want to point it out this reason is because it jumped 6 places from last week at the 16th position to 6. What is 8089? Typically, most oftentimes it's used as alternate HTTP ports, also popularly, I think, used by Splunk interfaces, but most infamously used by lots of IoT devices like microtik devices, so those kind of routers. But looking at the trend, it kind of tapering down since 2-3 weeks. And also we have heavily discussed about this port. I haven't included any charts for this week for discussion.
It's interesting because when I see 8089, I always think of Splunk. That one always, kicks in.
Yeah, that's most often used port, John. But I think infamously, it's been used by lots of IoT devices, specifically microtik-based devices. That's what we found from our analysis. But it can be used by any number of ports, any number of services. Moving on to the top sources probing for this week. What does the top sources probing indicate? It's basically the increase in the top sources typically signify some sort of activity happening on the common backbone. For instance, a new botnet is coming up with new tactics or techniques, maybe some zero-day activity related to a port is picking up. That will be reflected in most sources probing here. Again, looking at the chart here on the table, the top 4 or 5 actually seems to be almost constant since the last few weeks. Again, 445 TCP took the first position because of the SMP bleed and various other 445 related exploits. 23 TCP and 22 TCP almost they go hand in hand all the time by the IoT-based botnets. If any botnet is out there, the first thing they will do is scanning for open telnet port followed by open SSH ports. That's the reason these ports always try to be competing for the first few top spots. 1433 TCP, even this is related to MS SQL, but looking at the trend, it seems to be almost at the constant levels. 53 UDP is again DNS related, but I think the interesting 53 UDP since few weeks is because of increased, I think, DNS related amplification as well as some reflection attacks happening out there in the internet world. 8080 TCP, I'm not going to touch about it, but 59 TCP is the one which piqued my interest. It was, I think, it was in the top 20 last week, but it jumped 13 positions to number 7. And one thing with 59 TCP is it's typically associated with virtual network computing, which is heavily used Linux and Unix world, but also sometimes used in the cross-platform, like a Windows for sharing some sort of remote desktop kind of thing. That's the reason I think it piqued my interest. And I have a couple of slides depicting what we are seeing, what it could mean to the increased activity. This is the graph as we see from our common backbone, and I'm trying to show in the last 6 months of data how the trending is happening. For example, if you see in the last 2 weeks only, the number of scanners have heavily increased. If you look at I think even the levels right now we are seeing is much, much higher than what we are seeing typically, I think, in February 2020 timeframe. And if it's, for example, at the peak here, we are seeing about 4,500 to 5,000 scanners at any point of time in a given time of the hour. What does that mean? I mean, is there any geographical distribution of these scanners coming through? And this is one of the graphs from one of the automated reports we generate. And one of the reports, actually, when I pick the source IPs from them, they have about, at that point of time, about 3,000 IP addresses. When I plotted into this geographical map, they're showing most heavily concentrated in VG for Venezuela, US, Netherlands, and CA, I think it's for Cayman Islands, I believe, or one of those islands which exists in the middle of nowhere. That's interesting. I think typically when you see something like that associated with some sort of island, it's definitely related to some nefarious activity. With that information, we kind of looked at our honeypot data. Is there anything we can pick it up from there? And looking at the data in Honeypot, obviously the number of sources, maybe data we see in Honeypot would be much, much smaller compared to our common backbone. So here, I want to drive the point. If we see the graph here, the pie graph here, you can see the distribution of the activity happening on this port 1500 TCP. But 1500 TCP, the agents are maybe whatever the analysis we are showing it here, it's most often times it's HTTP. About 62% of the time it's HTTP. And RDP, it's REST followed by the RDP for the 30% of the time. And there are some malformed HTTP, and VNC is very minimal. This tells me something. Even though the port is used for VNC, I think it's been used to scanning for RDP-based stuff because of the reason HTTP is involved as well as RDP. And I think looking at some of the PCAPs and a little bit deeper, that kind of tells that even though it's VNC port, I think there are weird RDP requests in there. Also some malformed HTTP requests in there. That kind of gives there's something happening on this port. Maybe that's the reason most of these bad actors are trying to scan for any vulnerable devices, maybe responding back on 1500 TCP when they want to exploit it. And this is a breakdown of the source IPs as seen from the honeypot data, not from the common backbone. Still, we could kind of extrapolate here. The sources are, I guess, more or less seems to be from the same regions, like Asia Pac, maybe European regions, and also from North American region, which we could say we can correlate to US. But by looking at the reports also, I could also see there are lots of scanning activity happening. Like there are some known scanners by the research institutes and also the known bad scanners which are trying to scan for these ports.